Can I start, Reham?
Yes, I will just start with the introduction and over to you, Mr. Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the 31st session of Majlis Al Khonji. Today, we will discuss one of the most important topics, schools reopened during COVID-19, and a case study from Rossall School. You can listen to their experience in promoting safety and well-being for their new academic school year. Today, we have Mr. Mike Hansen in moderating this session. Welcome, Mr. Mike, and over to you to welcome our guests and start the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reham. Salam alaikum, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Sabah khair to those in England and behind us, and Masal khair, Jameen, for us here in Oman. Thank you, Mr. Khalil, for this opportunity with Majlis Al Khonji, and welcome, Jeremy, and also Lucy from Rossall School. You'll see a picture in a minute when Jeremy starts his presentation of what a beautiful school and area in the UK that he's going to speak from. Jeremy is a long-term educator. He did his history degree at Peterhouse at Cambridge University. He did his master's at Trinity College in Dublin. He's worked overseas teaching English, and now he's a form of academic policeman. He's also a compliance inspector. He'll explain more. We have an interesting subject because here in Oman, we've recently received a directive from the Supreme Committee that the public school system will start on November the 1st, 2020. So we have an interesting perspective now that we can listen to through Jeremy on what's happening in the UK, so we can learn, we can benchmark, and we can adapt. So welcome, Jeremy, and over to you, please.
Well, thank you, and good morning. And it's a real honour and a privilege to have this opportunity this morning to share some thoughts with you about how we've gone about reopening our school. We are very lucky, and you'll see when I start my presentation. I'll just share the screen now. We're very, very lucky. Hopefully, you should be able to see this. I'm hoping that my screen has been shared. Can you see the picture of the school?
Yes, that's
brilliant. That's very reassuring. So my only time in, I have been to Oman, and as a very young teacher, I was teaching in Abu Dhabi, and I decided I'd take the bus from Abu Dhabi to Muscat one day. I think it took about 12 hours, and I arrived during the most apocalyptic flood in Muscat that you could possibly imagine. But I woke up the next morning, looked out of the window of a very fine hotel, and what a stunningly beautiful well, city it is, and of course what an incredible country in terms of the mountains, people, and everything else. So it's a real privilege to be able to share some, to talk with you this morning and meet with you. So really, obviously, my understanding is that your public schools are reopening on the 1st of November, and you will obviously be grappling with the same issue that we've been grappling with, and obviously globally we've all been grappling with, which is how do we bring back our children safely to school in the sure knowledge that for many children around the world, they will have missed out on much of the last year, and however good remote learning is or online provision, it's not the same as face-to-face contact. And of course, schools like Rossall pride themselves on the diversity of opportunities that they present for their pupils, and of course the sort of social, emotional, sporting, creative aspects of school life, which really do need to happen in person. That's what we're grappling with. Mike points out that I'm a compliance inspector for independent schools within the UK. That's true, and in a sense, were it not for that, I would say that before January 2020, my knowledge of public health and hygiene and so forth was probably as limited as anybody else's. And of course, in many areas of many industries, but particularly within education, you have people like myself running schools, but of course, our training or our background probably doesn't well suit us for dealing with the obvious consequences of a global pandemic. So it's had to be a very, very fast learning curve for all of us. So that gives you, that just gives you a little bit of an introduction. Now, we are welcoming back all of our pupils for 2021. And what I want to share with you is really a sense of what we're doing to ensure as normal a school life as possible. Somebody yesterday sent me, I think on Twitter, a photograph of kindergarten children in Thailand sitting in individual perspex boxes and said, and passed some comment. Now, clearly, if you're bringing back children in a manner like that, then it probably isn't actually worth bringing them back at all. So all the way through, we've got to balance the need to minimize risk with the need to obviously maximize educational opportunity and to look after our children very much from an emotional well-being perspective as well. So in England, obviously we're governed, we have Public Health England, who issue guidance and advice. We have the Department of Education. The Department of Education's advice and Public Health England, they don't always coincide. Some of what we're given is statutory, i.e. we need to follow it, or regulatory. Some of it is guidance. What we have found as a school is it's very, very necessary to be strategically agile, to be adaptive, to be proactive, to be on the front foot, and not to simply wait for the latest government guidance and then sort of meet the minimum standard which they suggest. So all the way through, with everything that we've done, we've been informed by best practice in international educational settings around the world. We're a very international and interconnected school, which helps us hugely. So we'll talk a little bit about the preparations we've put in place to become a safe school, and also what we've done to adapt our offering, or the Rossall education, if you like, both for our UK families, but also as well for our international families. And I think a more interesting question, which perhaps arises as a result of COVID-19, is of course the future of education. What is education going to look like in 2021 and beyond? Because clearly, it's not a case, people talk in the UK of a new normal, but what we can't do is simply replicate what was there 5 or 6 months ago. We have irrevocably changed as a result of the experiences that we've been through. There's no question of that. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of Rossall School itself, it was founded in 1844, one of the leading independent schools in the UK, I think it's fair to say. We were from 2 years old to 19, but from this September, we're actually taking babies from the age of 3 months and upwards. So we really are almost from 0 to 19. We have about 650 pupils. A majority of our pupils come from the northwest of England, but we have a boarding community of about 250 students, and they represent a staggering 45 different nationalities. And that's one of the real strengths of the school, is that there's not a really heavy preponderance of students from one country, but we are very, very diverse. As a school, I suppose we focus on academic success, and providing outstanding teaching and learning, inspiring our pupils to be creative, to fulfill their potential. And all of that happens in a school community which is very personable, where pastoral support, it was deemed, certainly in our most recent inspection report, to be outstanding. And there's a very warm environment. There's certain things where we really excel. So, for example, our football academy with Fleetwood Town, which is a League One club, is one of the top football academies in the country. Our golf program, our golf academy is world class. Last year we were #1 in the UK. This year we're #2. So those are things that we really focus on. We are very, very much interested in embracing the very, very latest practices in terms of teaching and learning. And I think that when we went into lockdown, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, that helped us hugely. But typically, most of our students will go to top 20 universities if they're staying in the UK, or of course, some of them will go to top institutes or institutions around the world. So we've got 4 this year on full sports scholarships to America. But we've also got children going to the University of Milan, the Polytechnic in Hong Kong, which will be familiar to, I'm sure, to some of you, and the Institute of Paris as well. So, you know, our children achieve very good outcomes. Let me just show you a very, very short video, because I think that will help to give you a sense of our location. And I think you will see, obviously, as a boarding school, there are unique challenges to reopening. But I think when you see the size of our site and our relatively, it's fairly self-autonomous, I think you'll see that also that perhaps presents us with some opportunities, which makes it easier for us than an inner city school.
The best thing about living at Rossall is meeting pupils from many different countries and sharing our stories of not only our childhood, but also the different lifestyles and religions that we have.
Rossall is different from other schools due to its unique location, the people within it, and the varieties of opportunities available. Due to the small class sizes, you can really build a good rapport with your teachers, which means you are able to get the most out of your subjects. As well as this, studying is not just confined to the allocated time in the classroom, due to the fact that teachers are willing to go above and beyond to ensure you achieve the best results possible.
There are some interesting societies you can get involved in, such as Lancashire, MUN, and Politics Society. These are really useful to help acquire skills and experiences to help you in your future career.
In school, I am currently part of the CCF. This is the Combined Cadet Force. During my time in CCF, I have had the opportunity to take part in different courses, which means I've been able to receive the promotion of being corporal.
Thanks to the teachers' encouragement and enthusiasm, my priority and focus is on my studies, and I make sure that I push myself to the best of my ability. I play rugby competitively for the school, and I have taken part in many other team sports as well as individual sports. This includes hockey, football, athletics, cross hockey, cricket, and fives. But this is just a small selection of the sports that are offered here. You can also do things such as swimming, table tennis, and yoga. The list goes on.
My favourite memory in Rossall was when I was in Year 8 and my rounders team won a tournament. It was not just because we had won, but also because after hard work and determination, we finally achieved what we had worked so hard for. This was thanks to our teacher, as she pushed us to work as a team and not give up when things got tough. I've applied to various Rossall Group universities to study politics. I'm confident that I will succeed in what I'm set out to achieve.
Studying in Rossall, an international boarding school, has not only helped me to improve my English speaking, but it has also allowed me to acquire many friends that come from all around the world. I'm part of our School 5 team, and I'm also interested within our School Chapel 5. Both provide endless opportunity for me to visit a different school for a class fiction, or to visit a cathedral or church for evensong, or to take part in a service. Rossall is different from other schools due to its unique location, the people within it, and the wide variety of opportunities available to me.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an introduction to the school. Of course, that was shot before social distancing became a thing, as you can tell. And actually, you can see some of the activities in there, such as the chapel choir, which obviously can't come back in its current form anytime soon. But it gives you a sense. By the way, the game you saw being played on the beach is called Ross Hockey. That was a game which was developed at Rossall itself and is still played to this day. So let's go back to what happened in March. And obviously lockdown happened at different times in different countries around the world. We closed our campus slightly ahead of the UK government's announcement that we were going into lockdown. And we closed the campus when it became clear to me that the pandemic within the UK had reached a level where we needed to act decisively. And I think in the early days, we were very frustrated with the UK government's response on a number of levels. We felt that when the rest of Europe was entering lockdown and taking great precautions, that in the UK, not only had we not really got sufficient PPE, it transpired, because we hadn't had a pandemic since 1918. So there was a mindset culturally within the UK that this sort of thing was something which happened in other countries. It didn't happen here. You know, we weren't affected by SARS or Ebola or bird flu. And so there was a real complacency. And so the Cheltenham Gold Cup went ahead. Nearly 3 million people went to Cheltenham. I think it was the weekend before the 18th of March. Liverpool played Juventus at Anfield. And there was a strange sense in which we seemed to be sort of gliding into a disaster. So that meant that from the outset, we were very proactive, and we realized that as a school community and as a business, it was our responsibility above everything to look after our members. And so we were the first school within the UK to split our site between boarders and day pupils. We introduced temperature checks in the morning. We had medical questionnaires. And that period when we'd split the school into 2 sites meant we actually had 2 weeks when we were able to model and trial all aspects of online learning. It's not doing my staff a disservice to say that they were not necessarily, all of them, the most digitally aware educators in March this year. However, at this stage now, they're outstanding, they're brilliant. And that couple of weeks when we were operating as 2 different sites, where we had some teachers on one side and some teachers on the other, meant that actually it was very easy for us to refine what we were doing online, because we knew, it was very clear, at least to me, that that was how we were going to have to operate probably for the remainder of the academic year. So it was a very, very strange time. What we did as a school, as I said, gained significant attention within the media. But I think that was because we were always being proactive, and we were always ahead of the curve, and we weren't waiting to be told what to do by the government. I think that's really important. Incidentally, I think one of the things we had to deal with as a school, with our international community, was there was a lot of stuff in the media about the NHS, the National Health Service in England, being overwhelmed. Now, it never was. We built 4 hospitals with a capacity of thousands and thousands of beds. Only one of those hospitals was ever used, and only that was used very, very lightly. So in terms of ventilators, in terms of hospital beds, and in terms of the NHS's response, it was always very, very good. The problem was at government level, the lack of planning, the lack of PPE, and things like the decision, for example, to send elderly people back into care homes. So there's a lot of negative media that we had to deal with at the time. And I think that in a sense, the upshot of that has been that the government has ratcheted up its response very, very well. And so now, if you look at the testing figures, we test millions more people than any other country in Europe. We've got billions of pieces of PPE now stockpiled. We have huge capacity, additional capacity within the NHS. So now we're very, very well set up. But as I said, I think you've got to imagine a country which hadn't had a pandemic for 100 years and never thought it was going to have one again. So that's where we were. We continued to remain open throughout lockdown. And you may remember in the UK during April, we had some very difficult days in terms of the figures, the size of the pandemic, which is now obviously very much under control, but it wasn't in those early days. However, I think because of the actions that we took, we didn't have any recorded cases of COVID-19 at school. We didn't have any health problems. I think it's partly our location, partly the measures we put in place. And where the school is was remarkably untouched in real terms by COVID. So throughout lockdown, we had children with us. Probably most days we had the children of key workers, so in other words, nurses, doctors, and so forth. We had 30 boarders, and we had about 30 children who live on site. So we never shut. We were always open. We usually had about 70 or 80 children in the school. At the end of the beginning of this week, we also started welcoming back our boarders for the forthcoming academic year. Many of them are coming from countries where they need to quarantine. And as much as we're allowed within the quarantine program, we also give them opportunities to have an introduction or reintroduction, if you like, to boarding school life. So as I said, we've opened our doors on the 10th of August. There are logistical challenges in some of our children coming back to school. I think out of 250 boarders, only 15 have opted to learn online, and then mainly in the Far East. almost every other student is coming back to school. And I think that's interesting in itself, because I think it demonstrates the level to which, after 6 months away, parents, and more importantly, perhaps the children themselves, want to get back. They're desperate to come back. But of course, it's our responsibility to make sure that they come back safely. I'm not going to dwell too much on what we're doing within the context of our quarantine program, but within their own boarding houses. So at the moment, they're in bubbles within their own boarding houses. They can't mix with one another freely, but obviously their house parents, who are essentially isolating with them, are also doing whatever activities they possibly can. They might be having online learning in terms of EAL if they're coming from, if their English needs some work, or they might be doing some activities outside when they can socially distance, or our footballing coach can work with them individually. So I'm not going to dwell on that. So in terms of preparations for coming back, it's one thing to be critical of a government's response in terms of the global pandemic, but actually I think what really matters is what you then do in response. And Rossall School founded something called the Safe Schools UK movement in May 2020, so about 2 or 3 months ago now, and a huge amount of schools have signed up to it, as have educational agencies and so forth. And what we realised was that there was a real need for the sector as a whole, the independent education sector within the UK, to adopt the highest possible standards of safety, to really ensure and reassure not just international pupils and their families, but all pupils and their families that when it comes to that point when children do return to school, that we do so in a way which minimises risk. And I think that we spent much of April, we always have we always talk to contacts around the world, and we spent much of March and April really listening to what was working well elsewhere. And then through April into May, we put all of this together into sort of master plan in terms of what we as a school were going to do. So that's included the wearing of face coverings. We've introduced thermal imaging cameras. We've put in place extensive social distancing measures. We have voluminous risk assessments. The whole school risk assessment runs to 60 pages or more. We have isolation suites in our medical centre. We've insisted on single room occupancy in our boarding houses. There's very stringent protocols. Very few people are allowed to come on site. No deliveries are allowed, for example, are allowed to come on site. And we do everything we possibly can to minimise risk. And some of these in the UK, such as the wearing of face masks, cause for real cultural adjustment. So it's not just what you do in terms of the tech that you buy or the measures that you put in place in terms of cleaning and so forth. It's often in some countries, I'm sure, or some communities, it's also about affecting meaningful cultural change as well. Finally, the thing that we really needed to do was to make sure that all children, if they couldn't come back into the classroom, that we can offer them online learning, and that we can flip in and out of online learning, were we to need to, if there's another local lockdown at any time. So we produced a COVID-safe brochure on the 1st of June. I think communication with all stakeholders is incredibly important at this time. What we communicated to parents really outlined all of the measures that we're taking in place, because of course everybody does want to know, well, how are you going to manage the dining hall? Is my child going to be able to come back and wear their usual school uniform? They might seem very prosaic and dull questions, but certainly Lucy has been inundated and still is daily with such questions. Other things that we needed to think about. So we're one of the first schools in the UK to adopt a Bluetooth track and trace system as well. So we've really gone all out to minimise risk. And the things I think we also have to consider is that we've just appointed not only the first director of wellbeing here, but we've also appointed a head of inclusion and diversity. We like to think we're a very inclusive community, but I think as the Black Lives Matters movement has shown, I think that we all have plenty to learn about people's cultural and ethnic backgrounds. And I think we're very acutely aware of some of the rhetoric which has been out there in the media, in some countries, about blame and so forth around COVID. So we're just very careful of that and conscious of it as well. So yeah, I talked about communication just now. Really, really important. And before March, I had never, And this sounds quite embarrassing to admit, but I had never actually spoken to a group of parents. I'd spoken individually to parents on Skype, obviously, but I'd never really addressed our parents as a body via Zoom or using Google Meet. And I certainly hadn't hosted a live question and answer session on Facebook. Now we do all of those things routinely. And I think it helps our parents to feel much, much closer to us, much more connected with what we're doing. And of course, it's one of those things which we now do because of COVID-19, and that's why we introduced it, where I think to myself, why on earth didn't we do that before? But now obviously it's something that we do routinely. So we have, obviously there's a risk of over communication, but nevertheless, and maybe we've been guilty of that at times, but we have provided weekly bulletins, updates. We're very open with our parents. We made it very clear from the outset that were there to be a problem or a case or a suspected case at school, we would automatically share that with parents immediately. I think we've been very honest and open about all aspects of what we're doing. And I think that the upshot of that is that our parents feel very, very comfortable posing questions, whether in a live forum to us or via email. So we quickly established a reputation when we were in lockdown for delivering a first-class educational experience online. 15,000 lessons were taught online between March the 23rd and when we broke up for the summer term on July the 4th. And I think what we faced the future with much more confidence, because whereas in March we'd never done that before, we hadn't, the idea of running a school remotely was something which filled us with I suppose, worry. Whereas of course now we know we can do it. Not only do we know we can do it, we know we can do it really successfully, and that actually there's no great drama where we need to do that again at any time. So one of the things I think that was really important was that for parents who are not here, they needed to be able to see what all of these things would look like. So our brochures, really explicitly show that, this is what one of our boarding rooms looks like. This is what we are doing in the kitchens. This is, we are testing when children come back to school. We test them on day 1 and we test them again on day 14. We've got a contract with Oncologica, who are a Cambridge-based biomedical company. And you get a sense here of some of the imagery which is around school. You can see it was really, really important for our parents to be able to see, if you look top left, the isolation, an example of an isolation suit. Well, what happens if my child is ill? Because actually there was horror stories out there that a child would be left, or they wouldn't be looked after, or it would be they'd be too terrified to go near them. So it's really, really important for our parents to know that actually, if one of them did test positive for COVID or they had symptoms, of course they're in the medical centre, they're looked after 24 hours a day, and they have a comfortable room, and they have all the sort of love and care that you would expect them to have all the time, but especially at a time like that. Interestingly, the image at the bottom there, it caused a little bit of disquiet because people said, well, you're taking, your children have got to walk through a camera. But of course, actually, once all our junior school children came back on the 6th of June, of course, they thought it was great. And again, you will always have people who will say to you, well, you shouldn't use thermal imaging cameras because they only pick up people who are symptomatic. And they don't pick up people who are asymptomatic. And my answer to that would be, well, right, yeah, that's good. That's certainly the case. But if we can stop children bringing back, day children arriving at school with a fever, then surely that's got to be a good thing. So the feedback from parents to all of this was very, very positive, and that was very affirmative as well. And I think there's a common theme here, and that is about us acting swiftly, acting well, and also communicating effectively. And so I think we've kept a parent's confidence. And the one which we haven't got here, which mattered most to me, was probably in early May. One of our parents is a critical care nurse, and she wrote a letter, I think, to me and to Lucy, saying that the measures that we had taken in terms of social distancing within the school, locking the school down, splitting it into 2 sites, she felt that in all probability that could well have stopped the school becoming a centre of transmission and potentially have saved lives. And so I think that was a reminder to us that everything we do here in school, it's not just about protecting children, who, let's face it, we all know are very unlikely to be affected adversely by COVID. But of course, all of our children will be the same, obviously, in Oman. You know, will have parents where there might be diabetes, high blood pressure, and all sorts of other chronic conditions, which means that they could take that home. So our responsibility goes well beyond the school. So COVID-19 has made us adapt, use technology much more. As I said, you know, parents' evenings will now happen by Zoom. It's about also being creative, incidentally, in those areas of the curriculum which can't operate as they normally do. We can't really have a normal school play for obvious reasons. So this year, I think we're putting on Christmas Carol at Christmas, but it will be a feature film, and it will bring together filmmaking skills, the music department, and the drama department. So we can do really exciting things, but they might look a little bit different than they have in the past. All of our concerts will happen online. So on the one hand, you can say, well, that's a shame, the children won't have audiences. And on the other hand, you can say, but this is great because international parents are going to be able to see what they've never really seen before. So you know, a lot of the things which might seem in the first instance as an insurmountable obstacle, they often actually turn out to be an opportunity. For example, our open days in the past, you know, we greet people at the door and we show them around. Well, that's absolutely great, isn't it, for our local families? But realistically, people aren't going to travel from Tokyo and Shanghai for an open day at our school. So we now have a virtual open day. We have parents who run a TV production company, and they'd furloughed all of their staff, and they was a bit of a loose end. They helped us out with that and did a fantastic job. So all of we've used technology to communicate effectively, to deliver the curriculum, and now in terms of our Bluetooth tracking and tracing system, to keep our community as safe as possible. So whatever its limitations, clearly digital technology for us has been a game changer, and perhaps even a lifesaver for school in our position. So in terms of looking forwards, I think it's fair to say that all schools are adapting because of the number of activities which are obviously that we can't do in their current form. As you said, you know, whole school assemblies and so forth, any sort of gathering when we come back is not going to be possible. What I'm trying to do is, really, as I just said, and as a community and as a school, is to focus on all of those fantastic things that we can do and to use this as an opportunity. So, for example, we can't bring back the chapel choir, but in a socially distant sense, we could have smaller groups singing, maybe 4 students, but, you know, obviously very, very well distanced. And actually, that can be an opportunity to really improve their ensemble skills and their vocal skills. So everything that we can do, we will do, because I think what's really important, I come back to my first point about the little children in the kindergarten in Bangkok. If we put people in a perspex box and say, right, this is great, you're back at school, get on with it, that's not really delivering an education. So I think it's about ring fencing your community, having an arsenal of weaponry with which you can deploy to reduce the risk. But within that community, you then need to have some sense of normality, or the emotional and psychological damage long-term on children could be really profound. So you can see here, I mean, this gives you an idea of some of the sort of activities that we do. You know, some things obviously we can continue with, other things we probably can't. You know, our golfers have been gleeful because obviously it's about the most socially distant sports imaginable. So I think golf courses have reopened in May in the UK. So thinking about the future of education, just finally, then obviously very happy to take any questions. I think there was an article in a newspaper in England by the celebrated journalist Simon Jenkins saying, thank God now we can do without exams. Anybody who's been following the debacle, following the release of A-level results this week will know he might want to reflect upon that. So there are certain things which actually the absence of only reinforces the need to bring back as soon as possible. I think public examinations is one such thing, quite clearly. But also, I think face-to-face education. that it's quite clear that many of our children, by the end of the summer term, are desperately missing the social interaction that school life brings. There's one local boy who's how I put it, he's not a natural scholar or a man of letters, but he said to me the other day, he said, "Well, sir, even I can't wait to come back to school." What he is a boy who's incredibly sociable, who loves his sports, and also is very proud to be a member of this community. And so, you know, he's struggled in lockdown. And so I've yet to meet a child who's not excited at the prospect of coming back and reconnecting and doing all the things that, you know, we've always taken for granted and we took for granted in our own childhoods. So I think we have to consider the positive elements of online learning. You know, it's really interesting. If you go back about 6 months, there were lots of commentators in the Times Education Supplement in England saying, you know, iPads, what a terrible thing, and it's awful, these digital natives, you know, they're going to be locked into their devices. They've all gone very, very quiet since lockdown. But I do think that there is a lack of spontaneity. There's a lack of, we don't want to live our lives through cameras and screens, I don't think, and we don't want that for our children as well. So I really think the benefits moving forward, I think that obviously the use of technology has been supercharged. It's received an adrenaline shot in the arm as a result in education, as a result of all that's happened. But I think that what we'll move to will be a more adaptive and blended learning environment, rather than one where we sort of wholesale reject face-to-face teaching, or learning becomes something that happens remotely. It's worth reflecting on the fact that the only sort of remote schools which existed, not the only ones, but you know, in Western Australia during the 1920s and 30s, and the radio schools were set up for the children of farmers in the outback. That was very, very much seen as you know, as a second best, something that you put in place in the absence of face-to-face contact, or the possibility of face-to-face contact. I would suggest that the use of digital technology now, that they're 100 times better than, you know, sort of wirelesses or radios in the 1920s and 30s. Ultimately, it will always be second best to being part of an active, living, breathing, creative community. So there we are. That gives you a sense, perhaps, of the sort of things that we've done and the considerations that we've made over the last of the 6 months. And the upshot of it all is that we are emerging from this in remarkably good shape. Not just in terms of the school roll and student numbers or their academic achievements, but I think actually this whole experience has brought us closer together as a community, although obviously physically we've been apart. And I think that in terms of strategically, I think that we have had to be very flexible and adaptive and responsive. And I think that I was very fortunate that I had people like Lucy around me who were very, very strategically astute and aware, and moments when I was flagging or perhaps moving towards making a decision which wasn't the right decision, that they would challenge me. And I think it's really, really important as well for people leading institutions to have people around them who are not afraid to challenge them. And you know, I think that healthy culture has really helped us as well. So thank you very much, and back over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen now. There.
So Jeremy, if I could come in, please. So thank you very much for your words. And I've been tracking you with the notes that I've been making. And I'd just like to ask for you to expand a little bit on a thought that I'm having from listening to you. I'm guessing from how your school is adapting to welcoming back students and continuing their education, that if you're an A grade student, probably a B grade student, your ability to adapt and to understand some of the safe educational practices and the use of technology, some online. I guess that group of student will probably be quite competent and continue their learning quite well.
Yes.
But what happens if there's someone like me who may be a C grade or a D grade student, or as cruel people might say, a special needs student?
Well,
How would you look after someone like me?
okay, well, I'm sure that's not the case, but what I would say is this: we shouldn't underestimate the fact that our children, in terms of the technology aspect of it, first of all, if I deal with that, they will not struggle. I had to, when I was coming out of the house this morning, I had a great debate with my 3-year-old daughter Tegan, who had commandeered my iPad and had navigated her way onto children's Netflix and was intent on watching another episode of Peppa Pig. So, you know, they won't struggle with the things that we struggle with in terms of technology. They really won't. My wife is head of learning development here. She's a special educational needs coordinator. So we're very much hardwired into the experience of children who do struggle at school. They haven't struggled in lockdown with accessing things over Zoom or the technology, or even submitting their work on Google Classroom. It was the adults who initially struggled with that. And we have our heads around it now and have had for a long time. Where they struggle, I think, and I thought it was a really interesting point you were making about, is intrinsic motivation. And I think that is what, in lockdown, you find that struggles. We tried to do various things to combat that. So, for example, we had a 2-week half term, and we had an activities week. We tried to break up the Zoom time, because being on Zoom for 6 or 7 hours a day, if you have attention deficit disorder, it's pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult for any of us. And I think that I think that one of the things which has to happen now is that public examinations need to happen next year, come what may. They could and should have happened this year, frankly. The schools could have done them safely. But they have to happen next year, because the intrinsic motivation when you're working in isolation and you're 14 years old, yes, there was an initial excitement about Zoom. We were very lucky, I think, that our children, 95% of them, engaged superbly well. But even for all of us, I think towards the end of the summer term, the sheer volume of it was difficult to cope with. And it's not just the education aspect, Mike. It's children who, we have children who come from us from fractured families. We have a few children in all schools where they'll be at home, and maybe there's parents are going through a difficult time. In extreme cases, maybe they're witness to domestic violence. Maybe for 1 or 2 children in all schools around the world, the school is their sanctuary and it's the place where they feel safe. And so that aspect, I think, is something that worried us more than anything else. So that was a very long answer, Mike, but that gives you some of the idea of some of the things we've dealt with.
That's very helpful, and thank you for that. But if I could take it a little bit further, so my understanding of the way education is being delivered at the moment, particularly for the 13 to 18-year-old group, is it's wrapped around with this expression called STEAM. And my understanding is that a lot of education is groups of students coming together, each who have their own strengths, working together to problem solve or to create or to decision make. So when we're in an environment of socially distancing and online, what challenges do you see in trying to reconcile that direction?
You mean in terms of the learning experience being as a sort of collective, team building sort of aspect?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think obviously, so there is a danger, isn't there, that if you're operating on Zoom or whatever, it becomes very isolated and individualistic. Clearly, what I would say to that is that, again, technology plays a part. It's not perfect by any means, but I think that, for example, I know in one politics A-level class, because I used to dip in and out of online lessons. I taught a bit myself, but I also saw a lot of lessons which other teachers were doing. And so, for example, the time to real-time, sorry, let me start again. The ability to real-time collaborate using things like Google Slides, for example. I saw some fantastic presentations which were done together. Obviously, in the performing arts, we had children who were collaborating using technology as well. So there was a sense of shared endeavour in their educational experience, but realistically, in lockdown, that is not going to be as pronounced, as it would be if they were here. Children learn an awful lot. I'm sure we'd all agree. It's not just what happens in the classroom. We can deliver the maths curriculum via Zoom really quite well. And able mathematicians, I don't think our mathematicians, for example, our A-level mathematicians were at all behind the syllabus because they never missed a day. We carried on teaching throughout. So we can do all of that, but what we can't replicate in terms of education is the excitement, for example, my 9-year-old daughter feels when she gets on the school bus to go and represent the school playing hockey against another local independent school. Those experiences and that sense of being part of a community and having those shared experiences obviously is one of the most compelling reasons why we, schools have to be able to reopen safely, minimizing risk and maximizing the opportunity for children, I think, to share in those. Those we all remember from our own childhood, those experiences, don't we, where we felt part of something bigger than ourselves.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Reham, if you could lead for the next questions, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mike. We have another question from Mr. Khamis Mubarak. Please go ahead. The voice.
I think you have your microphone turned off. Oh.
Okay. Thank you very much. You have very impressive office, and you have very impressive building, campus, golf academy, and location. With all this online education, do you feel that some of your nice buildings will be empty so we can do some business in putting a hotel for a golf player?
Yes. Well, of course, they're not empty now. It would have been we could have, I suppose, had a temporary upmarket golf resort for a few very exclusive players between the months of March and June or July. But at this stage now, of course, all the boarding houses are back and full of students. But we are very lucky. I mean, on a serious note, we're incredibly lucky to have a campus which is so big, which I think is probably a couple of square kilometers. And that means that even when we were in lockdown, those boarders who were with us, you can go for a walk for 40, 50 minutes through our grounds without ever having to leave. So we are incredibly lucky. We are incredibly spoilt. And when I think back to the school I worked in Abu Dhabi, where we had 3,000 students in a place just off the airport road. I'm sure many of you have been to Abu Dhabi. So right in the heart of the island, just behind Airport Road. And of course, 3,000 people on a very, very small site. And classes of 35, 36, my biggest class was 41. That's going to be a lot more difficult to manage in terms of bringing children back safely. I think that's massively more challenging. So, whatever I say or whatever I have said this morning, I would add the caveat that we have that we have been helped as well by our location. Interestingly, there have been very, very few cases of COVID in Fleetwood where the school's situated. It just so happens that we have onshore breezes constantly. It's probably the most windy place in the UK. And again, you have to wonder whether the climate has helped us a little in that regard as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jeremy, we have a question from the chat. Can you talk a bit about the change the school made, if any, in terms of students' assessments?
Yes. Well, in the UK at the moment this week, that's a very sort of political hot potato. So in terms of assessments, we were one of the very few schools in the UK that actually ran a whole examination cycle this summer. We felt that it was cheating a generation of students to simply cancel out what they've been working for 2 years and for there to be no summative assessment. We thought it was really, really important that those assessments took place. And so, and again, I take no credit, it was really down to the organisational prowess of my deputy head academic. Every subject set examination papers for every year group had assessments in the summer term or exams. But for year 11 and year 13, they set examinations for a school diploma. And I think, again, my experience, particularly of working in an international setting, you know, in the Emirates, where most schools will also have their own high school diploma. In the UK, the idea of a high school diploma is something which people don't really understand. It's fair to say. You say, well, what on earth's that? Whereas, of course, you know, I suppose I'd started off in a school where ultimately the thing which the children were most working towards, they might be doing their SATs or their APs if they were going off to AUB or whatever. But ultimately, the high school diploma was important. And I guess it's the same in Oman as well, that you do a high school diploma. And you might supplement that with APs or whatever, or IB, whatever it is. So we did that, and we invigilated those examinations online in 41 different countries. Now, you say, well, how did you make sure that children weren't cheating? They had to have a device which was trained on them and their desktop. And then immediately, so the exam would start at 9 o'clock, and they'd have sort of a minute's grace or a couple of minutes grace at 11 o'clock or whatever to submit the paper, to photograph the paper and submit it. You know, can I say categorically that no child could possibly have had an advantage or tried to access something? No. Most A-level exams, though, for example, if you're writing a response to, I don't know, Jane Eyre or whatever book it is, you know, actually it's very hard at that level to you know, if you haven't got time, have you? You've got to write, you've got to get on and do the exam. So we felt that given the circumstances, the online invigilation that we had in place was pretty good. So we'd have one teacher in a Zoom classroom, and they would then be able to zoom in on individual students as well and check what they were doing. It's not infallible, but actually, you know, no invigilation of any exam is infallible, as we know. But what we did was we thought it very important to keep the assessments going, and I think we provided our children with the best possible opportunity to do that, and they did well. They took it seriously. Only one student decided they weren't going to participate in our upper six diploma program. Just one. He had an unconditional offer from a UK university, and he didn't see the point. And my head of sixth form was very upset about this. And I said to him, look at it the other way. 102 of them have decided that they will. Some of them have unconditional offers also from universities. So strictly speaking, they didn't need to. But the level of buy-in we had from our students was amazing. They did very well.
Thank you very much. I'll move to another question from His Excellency Musa Tai.
Thank you very much for this lecture, and very, very informative. I have a question. Obviously, you're lucky to have this elite school and manage this very unprecedented situation very well. My question is, in your development of, you know, your adjustment, was there any coordinations with other schools, especially like-minded schools who really need to learn from each other, or you went on it your own way and it went well for you? Another question.
Yeah, okay.
How can I ask another question so I don't come back with you, please?
Yeah.
Another question is, how is the relation with the regulators in general, like government and regional regulators? Did it also work out with whatever guidelines they set? And what are the challenges in that regard? Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, I think they're both really excellent questions. So in terms of working with other schools, The answer to that was absolutely yes, unofficially. So I think when all of this first happened, it happened very quickly, and you know, it's very easy with hindsight to make it look as if we were always beautifully in control. But I think that first of all, we'd hoped that we were going to be able to keep our borders throughout lockdown, and actually maybe we could have done. We don't know. We got very, very confused messages from the government. So there was a Wednesday evening of the week, I think it must have been about the 16th of March, when the government sent us a message through, I think, Baroness Aldridge, who represents the independent sector, saying that schools should keep their borders. And then the next morning, Robin Fletcher, the head of the Boarding Schools Association, which is the sort of representative body of UK boarding schools, said that he'd been told by the government that pupils should return to their home countries if it was safe to do so. So within 24 hours, we had an about turn, and we'd worked so hard and strategized to keep our borders safely. But then within 24 hours, it essentially fell apart, and we knew that we needed to get as many of them home as we possibly could. Now, I don't think that would ever happen again, and I don't think that there's any sense that I mean, indeed, the government has explicitly said it wouldn't happen again. But that was very difficult for us to be reactive to, because it was a U-turn in government policy in a very short space of time. And I think at that point, certainly, we were physically exhausted. Many of us who, and I'm sure it's the same for many other school leaders, you know, we'd been probably working 19, 20 hours a day, dealing with worried parents from around the world, you know, often leaving the office at 12 o'clock at night, coming back at 4:30, 5 in the morning. And I think that the most difficult time for me was the end of that week, when there was that sense that not only were we exhausted, but we had to regroup very, very quickly and move into the next phase of delivering an online school. So that was challenging. Did we work together? Well, look, I think all the heads, probably, or school leaders, yes. So how did we work together? Unofficially, I would have been, you know, particular friends of mine. One is a director at Cognita, so a massive educational company in the UK. I think they're overseas in the Middle East as well. And that meant that he and I would talk very regularly. He had a sense of what I was doing, and I listened very carefully to what they were doing and what he was feeding me from the experiences of Cognita around the world as well. And so I think there's been a great coming together. Often we're in competition with each other, right? You know, because we're independent schools, we all want to do well. But over this, we have really worked together. And, you know, for example, there's another school very similar to us, not 100 miles from here, where the head and I would talk almost daily about the measures that we're putting in place, and, you know, every bit of government policy we discuss in terms of how we're going to respond to. There's a representative body called the Boarding Schools Association in the UK. There's also something called HMC, the Headmasters Conference, which is a group of 200 or 300 elite independent schools. They would provide some support. But actually, you know what? They're a little bit, some of the representative bodies were really slow to. So you had to pick your way between representative bodies of a sector, and the independent boarding sector in the UK, we all know it's very traditional, isn't it? And sort of historic and all the rest of it. And that actually is not necessarily what you need to be in the middle of a global pandemic and a crisis. You need to be adaptive, you need to be agile. And I think that we had a culture here which was perhaps slightly at odds with that prevailing culture. So whilst I was aware of other schools I was talking to, and, you know, WhatsApp groups that I was members of with other heads, whilst I was aware that they were very much adopting a wait and see approach, I wasn't happy to do that. But then that's maybe because I like to be in control of a situation as much as possible. So there was that. So we did work together, and I think that that's represented in the fact that Lucy is responsible for us founding the Safe Schools UK movement. I think that was fairly altruistic, in as much as we recognise that, you know, it's about parents having confidence in us as a sector, not as individual schools. And I'm sure it's the same in any country, you know, that ultimately parents want to feel that UK boarding is safe. It needs to be safe, and that would be the same for any educational system anywhere. In terms of guidelines, that's a really, really interesting question. My sense is that countries with more interventionist governments will handle many aspects of COVID-19 very well, I think. I think it's fair to say. The problem in the UK is that we don't like to do as we're told. We're very bad at it, and that's not desperately helpful. So I also think that as a result of that, some of what would have been absolutely prescribed in some jurisdictions or some countries in the UK came across as guidance. Guidance is really difficult to deal with. Guidance, and that's why in the end, I think in terms of safety, we've ended up adopting best practice that we see around the world. Guidance from the government was a way of not being seen to compel people or force people in a regulatory sense, but to put the onus of responsibility onto leaders of institutions. And you can see that in all aspects of our response to COVID-19. However, one thing I think always to consider is that obviously that if you didn't follow the government's guidance, then then there were great question marks about whether or not you would be insured. So for example, I wanted to bring back more year groups. When we go back to the beginning of June, I was able to bring back 2 year groups in the junior school because that's what the government said you could do. But it was only guidance. They said you could bring back, there was nothing to really stop you bringing back the whole of the junior school at that date. The problem was no insurers would commit to bringing them back, even though we could bring back those children. You've seen how vast our site is. So we could have brought them back perfectly safely in bubbles in exactly the same circumstances as our year 1 and year 6 children. So dealing with insurance, making sure that from a legal aspect that you are fully insured was obviously very, very important. It's further complicated in the UK that we are not bound by the local authority. So the local authority might choose to keep schools shut, but we're not bound by that because we're an independent school. So we had a situation where we reopened, even though the local authority had advised that schools shouldn't. At that point, we checked that the government had said they wanted schools to reopen in terms of junior schools. We checked out our insurance position, and it was safe for us to reopen, and we did reopen because there was a world of difference between us on our rural site with plenty of space and facilities and some very, very small school in Greater Manchester, for example, on a very crowded site. So I think that was really important. The final thing to say in the UK is I don't know if you have teaching unions in Oman. I don't think there wasn't one in the Emirates when I was there, I don't think. But anyway, so we have representative unions of the teaching profession in the UK, the NEU and ASCL, and they could be very, very prescriptive and try and go up against the government in terms of the government saying we think it's safe for schools to do X or Y, and then the NEU most recently would have come back with 200 demands which they say that schools need to fulfill for their members, their teachers, to come back. Again, look, I'm very, very lucky because my school was, but now isn't very unionized. And my staff just want to get back and they want to get on with educating the children. So for some people, some heads, particularly of state schools in the UK, they've had to pick their way through the local authority, regulatory matters given by Public Health England or the Department of Education. They've got to listen to central government edicts, and then they've also got to respond not just to their parents and the pupils, but also making sure that they're keeping or that they're being responsive to the demands of education unions as well. So I have it a little bit easier, but it's still tough. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move to Mr. Khalil Al-Blushi.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I have a couple of points. What do you think? You have a boarding school. Isn't it easier to control this pandemic in a boarding school? Because you mentioned you do the test first day and day 14, but on a regular school, about 500 students, they will interact with 2,500 people at home and come back every day. What is your say on that one?
Yeah.
The other thing is, yes, yeah. The other thing is, now these extraordinary times, we do extraordinary things, not normal. Is it necessary to do extra curriculums? Is it necessary to do these group sports, or just the absolute necessary things? Because parents are worried how many hours we are exposing our children and all these things. So what is your say on that? My third point, if I don't know if it is good, but all these measures you took, obviously there was a cost impact.
Yeah.
How you manage that one? Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, first of all, I think it swings, you know, it's not clearly easier if we were boarding school in some regards. So, for example, we are boarding and a day school. So we've got 500 pupils who are day pupils. So I suppose I've always got the possibility of splitting the school site again if I had to. I don't want to do that because it's messy, because I've only got a finite number of teachers. And it means that for, you know, half of your school at any one time is learning remotely. So I really don't want to have to do that. I will do it if I have to. If numbers were to rise in the local area, it would be a sensible step to make. So I could then essentially cocoon my boarding community. You're absolutely right. And when we did separate out the two schools, most of the staff who taught in the boarding side lived on site. So they had to stay on site with their families. And then we had a few people coming onto the boarding side, but they had to live under very strict conditions at home. And I only had staff on when I was confident on that side. If I was confident, they were absolutely going to abide by that. So I think that we have that option. Yes, we can. And certainly were we ever to be in a position again of a lockdown, it's very likely that we would keep all of our borders. Nobody would seriously now decide it would be a good idea to put people back on planes to, you know, scatter them around the world. So I don't think we're going to face that situation again. So it is easier, but then at the same time, of course, you've got to manage the situation of quarantine rules. In the UK, you have to quarantine if you're coming from certain countries for 2 weeks before you can mix. So that's a logistical nightmare. And also, we just got the fact that we're dealing with parental anxiety, potentially, because, you know, it's difficult enough for us to manage the situation with our children as parents, never mind as teachers or educators. But of course, you know, we're dealing with people whose parents are 10,000 miles away. So I'd say that it swings and roundabouts. Now, you talked about co-curricular activities. Can we, and I would say a UK boarding or independent education is based very, very much around that holistic educational experience. So generally speaking, that, you know, you will have, you know, co-curricular activities for some of our children are as important as what happened in the classroom. To them, maybe not to us, but to them they certainly are. And I think what you have to do is you have to risk assess every activity, because you want to provide the fullest possible experience for your children. You know, parents are choosing the school for a whole variety of reasons. Our children do as well. And so, for example, seriously, it would be a bad idea to bring back the chapel choir. You know, we know, don't we, that singing in close proximity to others is probably about the most dangerous thing you can do. On the other hand, there's no real reason, if we adhere to strict protocols and procedures, why you can't play around with socially distanced golf, for example. There's no reason, as we can see necessarily, why we can't bring back non-contact sports. There's no reason why, for example, we can't bring back our cadet force and that they can't do certain activities. You know, one-to-one peripatetic music lessons, we can presume that they are all right. The art department can be open. There's no difference between having a debating society than having a class. You know, so I think that there's things we can bring back. There's things that we can't. You know, to put on a school musical clearly would be catastrophic at the moment. But as I said, you know, we can create a feature film. We can do something different. So we need to do that within, you know, the parameters. And the Department of Education, I've been quite critical of the government's position, but I would say the Department of Education has issued very clear guidance around many of these activities. And their position, I was looking through a document yesterday, actually, when I was advising our Director of Music. Their position is very clear that you can't see things like music, art and drama as bolt-ons. they argue that one of the reasons for bringing children back is so that they can access that whole curricular experience. Then you talked about the cost. So you imagine that we gave a discount on our summer term fees. And you know, we're very fortunate that our parents were very supportive of what we did, and they paid the summer term fees. There are schools in the UK where that didn't happen. Maybe parents weren't happy with the quality of the provision. Maybe they weren't happy with the discount. But of course, that discount meant that we lost over, as a school, you know, lost well over £1 million, and we lost all of our summer term. You know, usually the schools let during the summer holidays. That creates revenue. We lost that. We run a summer school. We lost that. We run up fairly significant losses. Now, having said that, we've been very well supported economically in the UK. So the furloughing scheme meant that for a lot of support staff, we were able to furlough. We were able to recover the vast majority of that money. I think that you know, we carried on recruiting throughout lockdown, and I take no credit for that. A lot of this is down to Lucy. Means that actually we do enter the next year in a fairly good state of health. Nevertheless, we froze school fees for this year, or at least for this term until the next academic, the next calendar year. And that means that it could have been more challenging financially than it's actually turned out to be. We emerged in better health than I thought we would. So the cost of all of these measures is not insignificant. So we've been lucky. We've got old Rossalians who love the school. And when it became clear that we were going to have to purchase things like thermal imaging cameras, they've all been purchased and gifted to the school by old students from the school. And that's a really wonderful thing. And you know, there's one lady who's in her late 80s who did this. She was the chair of governors many years ago, very, very supportive of the school. She said, you know, there's nothing more important I can do or gift the school at the moment than things that are going to help you all come back safely. So that was great. The track and trace system, we have put on an additional charge to parents. I think it works out at £3 a week for the next 7 months. So it's £99, one-off payment. And there was a PPE charge, which on people's bills, but I think it's £15 or £20. So relatively small. We've absorbed as much of the cost as we reasonably can. But you know, there are a couple of things where we have charged to parents. So how we've dealt with it, I suppose, has been a mixture of the fact that we've been very fortunate that benefactors have helped us. We've paid for some of it out of the fact, obviously, we do have accumulated sums as well, and contingencies in place. And also, you know, whereas we might not have put fees up and we might have discounted fees, in this respect, we have asked parents to make a contribution to the cost of it as well. And that means it's the difference of us of being able to do it properly or not. But it's a huge expense, and it's not just the devices or the tech, it's the staff you're employing to have a much greater enhanced cleaning regime, and all the things that you're doing. It's what about the fact that, for example, socially distanced picking up people from airports, suddenly you're doing twice as many taxis or to London, Heathrow. Well, that's not cheap, so everything adds up much more. On the other hand, you make savings in other ways because you're not playing away sporting fixtures and things like that. So it's too early to say yet, precisely whether or not the things that we're not doing as a school compensates for the investment that we have to make in PPE. I expect it's going to probably balance out fairly evenly. I think that was the three points, wasn't it?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Khalil, your questions have been covered?
Yes, thank you. I'm fine.
Thank you very much. We'd like also to listen from His Excellency Morimoto. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the microphone. I learned a lot from the school. I mean the Rossall school. In fact, I was very much impressed by the management, good management of the school in terms of tactical and strategic approaches. Before I make just a few comments, let me briefly touch upon the COVID situation in Japan. As of last night, we have about 53,000 infected cases, while there are 1,085 death cases. But it seems that Japan is entering the second echelon of the COVID-19. And these days, particularly after we admitted the economic activities, the infected person have very rapidly increased, daily 1,000 almost these days. So luckily, I mean, one of the biggest lessons we learned in this educational area is how far the Japanese system have been behind the international standards in terms of digitalization. After the emergency declaration was announced by the government, all schools are closed from elementary up to the universities. But the biggest problem the pupils had was that the public schools, elementary and the secondary schools, were not in a position to conduct online classes. So the first priority for the education ministry for the time being is to provide all the pupils and the students a laptop computer or iPad in order to introduce online lessons. Of course, private schools are much more advantage in that respect, but that is the biggest lesson learned we have. The second thing is we have now the summer break. So schools are closed, but the students are coming back to the school toward the end of the month. But as somebody mentioned, what is more problematic these days is that the pupils and the students get infected within the families, though they do not attend the school due to the behavior of the adult within the family. So the infected young people are more and more increasing in the whole society. That should be a big problem when the school started, because you know, this medical check system is not yet totally introduced. So everybody has a kind of a doubt in the school who is infected or who might be infected. That can be the problem we see in the next phase. Lastly, as you mentioned, I think the domestic violence, maybe domestic violence is a strong case, but accumulated stress within the family, keeping the kids at home is increasing. And that is a big social, I mean, psychological stresses for all the family members. This is also, we have to cope. Those are some of the comments I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you want me to respond to that? Or?
Yes, Jeremy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think that there is a sense, there's a lot of discussion at the moment in the UK. Obviously, schools are coming back. The government's position on that is very, very clear. That their belief is that the damage to children for not coming back to school, psychological and emotionally, would be much greater. What has also been said, though, in the UK is there may have to be some compensatory restrictions put back in place to compensate for an inevitable rise in the R level. I don't know if people talk about the R level in other countries. I think it means the replication level or reproduction level. I'm not sure.
We're not using it yet.
Okay, so that people talk in the UK about this idea of a R level, the reproduction level of the virus, and if it's above 1, then it means it's going to eventually start escalating. If it's below, it's all right. I think at the moment, we're in most areas, we're sort of 0.8, 0.9, maybe as high as 1. So we've unlocked much of the economy. There has been a rise. Well, again, we don't know if there's a rise in cases. The Office for National Statistics says that there's not, and it's just that we're actually testing far more. And the testing that we're doing is very, what we're seeing is some localized flare-ups. That yesterday it was reported that the general level of COVID continues to reduce, but we have these flare-ups in particular areas. Now, I don't know, I can't say that with any real accuracy, but that's certainly what we're being told. I've no reason to not believe that. So I think that what might have to happen in the UK, for example, is that maybe non-essential shops could have to shut. I don't think they'd want to do that, but there's been some talk of, say, for example, restaurants and pubs shutting. The pub, that great British institution, which we reopened before we even considered reopening schools, because it's obviously so essential to our well-being. These institutions may have to shut again to enable schools to reopen. So that's my understanding in the UK. The way we're looking at all of that is that carefully monitoring that rate of reproduction. And what the government have said is that schools should be the last thing to shut down in any subsequent lockdown. But you know, my sense is I think we had a pretty big first wave of COVID in the UK. And what we can take, I think we should take some sort of comfort from the fact that actually, you know, people are not going to crowd on commuter trains into London anymore. They're not going to attend football matches with 50,000 other people. A lot of high-risk activities just aren't happening anymore. So any subsequent sort of, you know, our ability also to manage what does come in the future is 100 times better than it was back in March. So my sense is that you will see, until we have a vaccine, that this will bubble away in most European countries throughout much of the rest of the year, but you won't see what you saw back in March and April, because frankly, we're not living like that anymore. And I know there's probably some images in the press of people sort of crowding onto a few beaches, but the vast majority of people are being very sensible. To give you an example, my mother's 79, and I last saw her in February because she's shielding. And the vast majority of people are actually being sensible. You know, we're a country of 67 million, so we'll have probably 1 million people who do silly things or more, but the majority of people in reality are being sensible. That doesn't make the headlines or the pictures in the newspapers, because of course it's not interesting. It's much more fun to look at people doing silly things. So that's where we are, and hopefully we'll be able to weather whatever the future begins. UK, I think it's fair to say that we feel great optimism in terms of a vaccine. I think the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is now in stage 3. All of the data which has come out of that has been very, very promising indeed. I don't think that we've just taken a contract on a track and trace system. That track and trace system expires on the 31st of March 2021. I would be astonished if we haven't got at least our vulnerable members of society vaccinated by that time. I think at the moment the signs are very good that should happen. The UK itself has ordered 160 doses of various million, not 160, that won't help us, but 160 million doses of various vaccines, including I think 90 million AstraZeneca vaccine doses. So I think we will see. I think we're talking about managing through the next 4 or 5 months. I don't think that people seriously think that we'll be scrabbling around for a vaccine in the summer of 2021. But who knows? I expect it's going to be, my sense is it's going to be a vaccine where you're going to have a booster every year or 2. I think a bit like a flu jab, I would imagine.
Thank you very much. I'll move to Mr. Simon Karam.
Thank you, Rehan. Thank you very much. If I may, Mr. Quartermain, leave COVID for a while and talk educational. I've got an educational question. and maybe financial question, which leads to the future. In terms of educational, what is the prototype student that you want to produce? You are educating 45 nationalities, plus UK, that makes 46, and plus maybe my children, that will be 47. No, my grandchildren, that may be more specific. You see, if you take a Jesuit student, you can define him. I mean, I'm not a Jesuit, but close to that. He's a guy who is very good at languages, very good at math sometimes. He goes to church, but he's nil at sports, and he's nil at social skills. What would be the prototype, your vision of the ideal or the model student? And if he is a prototype, if he goes to 45 different nationalities, would that create a tool for him to live, or more challenges? That's one question.
Yeah.
And the other question is financial, if I may. You may want to answer it or not. What are the fees for one student at Rossall? Is there a reduction? I think you answered this partially, for those who go online only. And is there a program, maybe that's where we have to take the advantage of technological advances. Maybe in the long run, you want to run a program, now that you're acquainted to it, for students who will never attend the school, but they'll do it all the time from, these are my questions. Thank you.
Okay. So let me start with the prototype of the students. What I'd say is this: is that what we can talk about. I think that we offer. I think that intrinsically, British boarding education is very individualistic. It focuses on the individual. People talk about KPIs as a school. I can flag up, yes, we're good at performing arts, or yes, we're #1 in the country for golf, or whatever. Or our exam results this year are very strong. That's all great. But ultimately, I think it's our responsibility as educators to ensure that we really inspire children and engage and inspire them to identify what it is that they're really interested in and that they really want to do, and then support them and provide them every last bit of support. So I think that there's a slight difference. When I was working in the UAE, I was very conscious of the fact that everybody was really very maths orientated, maths, engineering, science, and you can understand why, because of the nature of the economy in the Emirates, there's ADNOC and everything else. And so I think also people felt, if they were expats living in the Emirates, that they needed to be qualified in those sectors. I think it's fair to say, generally, if they were then going to remain as adults in the country, and so we do all of that, and I think our science department's very strong. We have people going off to Oxford, Imperial, and so forth this year to read science. But in terms of the prototype student, we want them to leave us with a confident, really skilled communicators, and with a real desire to go off and do real good in the societies within which they're going to live and work. So we want them, of course, we want them to be successful. Of course, we want to prepare them for the next stage of their education. The vast majority of our children, as I said, go to really top universities around the world. And we want them to have that, we want them to have the opportunity to be creative, to collaborate, to be good team players. And what when I talk about paying school fees, and I might be the head, but I said I've got 3 daughters and I have to pay the school fees. What really motivates me to do that is when I look at the quality of the young people who are in our 6th form, and particularly whose success we're celebrating at the moment in terms of their A-level results or their IB results. They're phenomenal, and I think that reflects very well on the school. Good schools, really excellent schools, I don't think base their offering around KPIs. I think that we're very ambitious, and we want to do everything we do as well as we possibly can, whether that's delivering the curriculum, whether that's hiring the very best teachers nationally and internationally, or whether it's our response to COVID-19. We want to be very, very good at what we do. We set ourselves the highest of standards, and I think that reflects on the children. You asked, yes, about what do they gain, I think, from being one of maybe 45 nationalities. Well, it's worth remembering that the school itself is overall, it's English, in as much as we're not an international school, we're internationally minded, but the vast majority of our students, 500 of them or so, are from this area, or borders from England. But of course, we are very, very diverse. I think they develop from that hugely, a massive understanding of different people's culture. I know that you said when you're talking about a particular type of students, I was thinking how different my wife's experience was going to a convent school in the west of Ireland. A very, very different experience in many regards. But they do benefit hugely from that interaction. They develop friendships with children around the world. Some of those friendships endure lifelong. When I visit other countries, whether it's Vietnam, Thailand, or Hong Kong, we meet up with a lot of students. And what's interesting is that lots of English students, for example, will have holiday destinations they can go to with friends all across the world. There was a very quick story I'll tell you. A couple of years ago, we had a student, or actually probably about 20 years ago, before my time, and he was working in the yacht club in Hong Kong Harbour, and he'd been working, scrubbing boats so hard, he went for a drink in the evening and he could hardly hold his drink. He was talking to a man, and it turned out that the man's son had also been to Rossall, but very sadly the man's son had died in a car accident on Hong Kong Island, and this father gave this other Rossallian boy a yacht, his son's boat. And so that's, so it shows you the interconnectedness. When I checked into the Novotel on Hong Kong Island a couple of years ago, about 18 months ago, the manager on duty that day had been to Rossall. When somebody recently was doing something in Amsterdam airport, the person sitting next to them was from Rossall School. So I think it's great. Look, I think that interconnectedness, that openness to cultures, I learned a huge amount from spending 5 years living in Ireland and another 2 or 3 years living, in the Emirates. I think it gives you the opportunity, doesn't it, to live life more vividly and more richly, if we have that experience to learn from each other in different cultures. So I think it's a good thing. And then you said about costs. So sort of boarding fees are around 35,000 UK pounds. But again, that gives you a ballpark figure. But of course, it might be if they're board in the junior school, it's slightly less. Or if they're flexible boarder, it'll be less. If they're day people, it'll be less. We do have scholarships. We do have bursaries. We don't want to introduce an online. We've got children learning online. And the question, I think, a really fascinating question you ask is, are we going to develop a product which is essentially just for online learners? So if we were being cynical, we could say that you could cannibalize your own market, couldn't you? I don't think we will any more than the vast number of UK boarding schools setting up international schools overseas has cannibalized our market. I think that, and that's something which we're definitely sort of in the process of doing at the moment. But, ultimately people still want their children to come to the UK for that full experience. It's possible. I think we're going to offer particular courses online. So we might offer astronomy GCSE online. We might offer A-level English online. I think it will be more bespoke courses, because ultimately, I don't think that children and most parents in most countries are going to want their children to learn exclusively online, because I don't think it would be desperately good in terms of social skills, confidence, communication, and all those other things that are why I expect children from Rossall tend to then go and overperform in their careers, not because of the academic aspect of being at school, as important as that is, but that confidence which comes with the expectation, to be able to communicate effectively and to participate in such a wide array of activities. So I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Let me make two little comments, you know. First, I'm very, very satisfied with the answers for a simple reason that one of my best friends, His Excellency Khalil Al Khonji, has got students in Rossall.
Yeah.
Children, yeah, that's, you know, I wanted to make sure that we get the good product and the good care. And I think I'm quite satisfied also because my question gave you the opportunity to explain to us more, not only about COVID and the preparation of COVID, but about the school and the program and the vision. So therefore, I thank you again. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Jeremy, for the presentation. And as Simon mentioned, my daughter, the last one, is in Rossall School.
Yeah.
Actually, I have visited so many boarding schools in UK, and my children got educated from Gordonston to Ellesmere to Felsted, Atlantic College, and Cobham Hall, and so on. I can say that Rossall School is one of among the best schools, of course, and in UK, and the location is also beautiful on the water side in Blackpool. So last year we were there, but it's very windy.
It is. But that's a good thing these days.
Yeah, make energy. Yeah, produce power. Yeah.
And
very fresh air.
Yeah, Nur Huda came back as all the students, Omani students from abroad, they came back home, and she continued. She stayed 14 days in, quarantine, and she was in her room, without failure, and she did all the, online, of course, lessons, and then. There was a question about exams. I think our children now, and your students are mature enough that they were actually locked down again in exams. I assure you, no one has helped her in any in the exams. Thank you again for all the updates. We receive almost every day all the updates during this time of COVID-19, and she's getting ready to go back to school, and we are comfortable enough that she is going back and she will be in good hands. Thank you, Jeremy. Back to Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Khalil. Jeremy, thank you very, very much, and you, Lucy, in the preparation for this Majlis session, and for your complete, coherent presentation. I'd like, with your permission, just to comment, just to try to summarize. So this presentation was all about Rossall School, a case study, helping us thinking about safety and well-being and preparation for this coming academic year. You started off impressively by talking about how the leadership in the school under you moved ahead of the UK government's guidelines. I mean, you were taking responsibility, a lot is common sense, but looking after all the members of the school. You had initiatives that were quite dramatic, splitting borders and day scholars. And you recognize the challenge of digitally enabling faculty and later students so that education could continue online. I thought impressively, the network that you have amongst other institutions of a similar independent status, the working together, the sharing of knowledge, the responsibility of a sector to each other, but to the students, and then particularly importantly, the assurance for parents to know that their children were being looked after safely. I thought it was very interesting how you're thinking now for the future in terms of adaptability in continuing education and the curriculum, but instead of the theatre approach and everyone coming together, the use of film and making a film to be able to develop other skills in filmmaking. The recognition, and it's important actually for us in business and probably in every walk of life, of the use of technology. It's a game changer, and in some cases, and you use the words, might even be a lifesaver for enterprises or for people. You talked about the need at the moment to ring fence your community. And when you looked forward and thought about, well, what will education look like in the future? Clearly, there's no easy supplement yet for face-to-face. And also the recognition that some people may need a little bit more help to get on this journey and to participate as they used to in the old way, if I can use those words. And that one thing is for sure, but adaptability, blending, hybrid, something is going to keep changing. Change will always be with us, but the outputs are great students. And I'll close, and I made a note of these words of the lady that gave the gift to the school. And if you got to know many members of this Majlis session, you will appreciate why I want to just say these words again, because it means something to all of us. And the words you said that this lady said to you, and I think she was a previous chair, but nothing I can do more importantly than gift that you all come back safely. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for your talk. Thank you, Lucy, for helping in the preparation. And thank you all for making this such a good session. And I think Nur al-Huda Al-Khonji, sorry, Nur al-Huda bint Khalil Al-Khonji,
yes,
is a very, very fortunate young lady. Shukran jazeelan, Sidi.
Lovely young lady, isn't it?
Thank you. Shukran.
thank you.
Thank you.
Back to Rehan.
A real pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we wish to see you in the upcoming session. I think we're having a session on Tuesday. We'll just update you with the timing. Thank you, our guests, and thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.